Everyone hear me? Okay. What's the most delightful thing you can imagine? You know, something that if you experienced it, it'd blow your mind and you could happily die. Yesterday, I bought an LP of a record of Kamal as a bit of a joke to give to my brother for his 50th birthday. That was delightful. Not profound, but delightful. What I'm talking about here, though, is delightful in the sense of it would make life worth living, right? That kind of delightful. How about being adored? How about being adored? I'm sure that we all like to be liked. We all want to be liked. No one's like inviting the hate. Yes, please hate me. No, everyone wants to be liked, right? Well, adored is just like turned up a few notches, right? So who wouldn't want to be adored? And yet I suspect that most of us don't think that that's a possibility, to be adored. I mean, let's face it, if you've ever stood in the mirror naked and looked at yourself, have you thought, perfect, adorable? No, we don't do that, do we? What do we see? We see all the blemishes, we see all the imperfections, all the things that are wrong. And if we get a little bit closer to the mirror and we look into our face and into our eyes and see maybe behind and what's inside, I don't think we like very much what's inside that much more. You know, all the dirty, grubby little things that we've thought and done and said, all those things that have been done to us. It's a little bit like that great story, The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I don't know if you've read this, but it's a fantastic story. And it's about a young, stunning man, a beautiful man, young man, who wishes that he would never grow old, that he would always stay young. And amazingly, a portrait of his gets old so that he stays young, right? But as he does cruel and immoral things, amazingly also the portrait of him becomes more ugly and more twisted. Until, and spoiler alert if you haven't read this or seen it, sorry, at the end, he's just overcome. He hates what he's become and he hates what his portrait shows him of himself. And so he takes a knife and he stabs it, but in fact he ends up killing himself. And he falls at the portrait, a withering corpse, and the portrait is restored to its perpetual youth again of him. It's a great little story, a little bit of an illustration of the fact that there is a moral cost to the choices we make. The choices that we make and those that have been made over us and done to us. There is hidden sins always leave a mark. Right? Hidden sins always leave a mark. And that's why I think we all fear, to one extent or another, standing naked or vulnerable before anyone. Because, well, we know what we're like. And the idea then that someone would adore us, that anyone would adore us, well, that's the land of fairy tale. But what if it isn't? What if it isn't a fairy tale? And what if this passage here in Song of Songs is actually promising that delight, the delight of being adored? Do you want to know that? Well, before we jump in and take a look, it's worth remembering that the Song of Songs it's a poem. Okay, it's a poem on the wisdom of love. It's about a farm girl and a shepherd boy who long for each other. In their dreams, they're longing for each other, and they see the danger of this kind of longing. And they call on each other to get rid of the little foxes in the garden of their love so that they don't ruin that garden, that relationship. And they also call on each other to warn us to not stir up sexual love before it's time, before marriage. But now, at this stage in the poem, we're coming to the wedding. Right? The farm girl, she's ready to walk down the aisle. The air is crackling with love and anticipation and excitement and delight. The delight of the wedding proper, and then the delight of the wedding night, in which we see the delight of being adored. And so that's what we're going to be looking at. That's where this passage is taking us. Firstly, the delight of a wedding, then the delight of the first night, to finally the delight of being adored. So, the first point is weddings are delightful. I mean, that's almost an obvious thing to say. Of course, weddings are delightful, unless you're this couple. But generally, weddings are delightful, okay? Weddings are delightful, like the weddings that we've had recently from Sam and Grace just a couple of years ago, and Jeremy and Erin's. If you heard about those, they're delightful. And part of the reason they're delightful is because they're fun and they're serious, right? Something important is going on at a wedding. Profound even. And it needs to be marked with a special occasion, which is why in the Song of Songs, as we come to the wedding, it's framed up in very royal and grand terms. First up, the man sees his bride coming up the aisle, or from the wilderness, as the poem describes it. So verse 6 we read, "Who's this coming up from the wilderness," he's saying. "Look like a column of smoke, perfume with myrrh and incense made from all the spices of the merchant." You can imagine him kind of turning around. He can't see but for the glare, but she's coming up the aisle. He can't see her, but he can smell her. Smell all the spices of myrrh and incense, these beautiful smells wafting towards him, and he imagines her coming to him as his queen, right? Coming on Solomon's carriage or dolly, surrounded by warriors, in gold and silver and purple and royal cloth, coming to him, the king of this moment, like King Solomon, calling on others to come and see it as well. So come and rejoice with him on this wedding day. So we read in verse 10, from verse 10, "Daughters of Jerusalem, come out. Come out and look, you daughters of Zion. Look on King Solomon wearing a crown, the crown with which his mother crowned him on the day of his wedding, the day his heart rejoiced." See, like a king, like King Solomon, the shepherd boy's heart is rejoicing. He rejoices in this day, his wedding, as he marries his queen. This is a delight. This wedding is a delight. But not just because he's got eyes for her, but because he wants other eyes on her and him. He actually wants others to witness this wedding, right? He calls on the daughters of Jerusalem to take notice. Come and see. It's not enough that the couple just get married in private off to the side. No, it's a royal affair. And like most royal affairs, it belongs to more than just the couple. I was 7 years old when Prince Charles got married to Lady Di. I don't remember much about it as a result, but I remember it being a big deal. It was called the fairy tale wedding, the wedding of the century. Around the globe, people were glued to their TVs. 750 million people, in fact. And that was just on TVs. That was 10 years before the internet, right? So, pretty amazing. Everyone, literally everyone, was watching, had been invited, come and see. And as a result, they felt they had the right to comment on everything: the wedding dress, the service, the wedding guests, the carriages, the foot guards, the household cavalry, the bride, the groom, the family. It was a public affair. It was a public affair. And as a result, more delightful for it. It was actually delightful because it was a public affair, as literally millions got to share in this fairy tale, which is kind of what's going on here in the Song of Songs. This fairy tale wedding, a wedding worthy of Solomon, a wedding to be enjoyed by more than just the couple, and that's still the case today for every wedding. And why people do it publicly, why it is to be done publicly, and why people are generally prepared to splurge on their wedding day. Nobody's going to be frowning on someone who pays a whole bunch of money on a dress or some fancy pants cufflinks, right? Because it's a wedding. It's important. It's worth it. The joining of a man and a woman in marriage, that's important, and as such it's got to be public, because it's not just about the couple. Sure, it's mostly about them, but it's not all about them, right? A wedding is bigger than just them. It's actually about how life is meant to be, And I think that's why we find weddings delightful. It's about capturing an ideal, something truly lovely, something truly beautiful and delightful. And as such, every wedding is a little bit disappointing. Because there's no such thing as a flawless wedding, is there? My wedding day started off picking up the photographer very early in the morning because during the week I'd found out that he had lost his license. And he needed to get some film for his camera, so he spent time trying to find a shop to buy some film. And then at the ceremony itself, I actually realised that I had forgotten my ring, and so I had to borrow the photographer's ring. It was a nice shiny skull ring. It was beautiful. Fortunately blurred in the very artistic photos that were taken. So, hands up, who's had a flawless wedding? Anyone who's been married, was it flawless? Flawless? Absolutely flawless? No. Not even nobody's had a flawless wedding. Not even a royal wedding is flawless. Apparently Lady Di, before she married Prince Charles, knew that Prince Charles was having a bit on the side. There's no such thing as a flawless wedding. But we all delight in them anyway, right? We all gather around the TV, we all eat up the news of any big wedding because they point to something better, something we all want to believe in, the fairy tale, the happy ever after. That's the first point though. As weddings, they're meant to be, and they are delightful, right? And so is the first night of the wedding. The wedding night is delightful, at least for the couple in this poem. Where from chapter 4 we move from the altar, from the chapel, where they've said their I do's, to the bedroom. And we see the groom, he just adores his wife's beauty. So we'll pick it up in chapter 4, verse 1. How beautiful you are, he says, my darling. How beautiful. Your eyes behind your veil are doves. Your hair, verse 2, your teeth, verse 3, your lips, your temples, verse 4, your neck, your breasts, verse 7. You are altogether beautiful, my darling. There is no flaw in you. From head to almost toe, he adores her. In fact, he kind of loses his mind over her from verse 9. And in Hebrew thinking, when you talk about your heart, you talk about your mind. It's actually your mind. And he says, you have stolen my heart. My sister, my bride, you've stolen my heart. With one glance of your eyes, one jewel of your necklace. How delightful is your love, my sister, my bride. And then verse 11, he says, your lips drop sweetness as the honeycomb, my bride. Milk and honey are under your tongue. So to him, her mouth, her body, they're like the promised land, milk and honey flowing, right? They're like the promised land to him. She's like the Garden of Eden in verse 12. Once locked up, but now opening to him as she invites him in. Verse 16, awake, north wind, and come, south wind, blow on my garden, that its fragrance may spread everywhere. Let my beloved come into his garden and taste its choice fruit. And so he comes, verse 1 of chapter 5. I have come to my garden, my sister, my bride. I've gathered my myrrh with my spice. I've eaten my honeycomb and my honey. I've drunk my wine and my milk. Anyone blushing? Now, before you have a go at me for reading such racy stuff in church, notice the last bit of the verse there, in verse 1. Eat, friends, and drink. Drink your fill of love. Whoever is speaking there, it's not the couple, it's friends. Friends of the newlywed, or maybe it's God himself. Either way, what are they urging? The lovers to indulge in each other's bodies, to drink their fill of each other. Not to keep it to themselves so it's out of everybody's mind, because we don't go there, but to encourage it. To encourage adoring and delighting in each other. A while ago, I remember someone, might have been me, asking a couple who'd just come back from their honeymoon, so how was it? Apparently you don't ask that question. The guy of the couple, he just very sternly said to me, "We've decided not to talk about that, thank you." Which sounds a fairly reasonable response, I think, for most of us. On one hand, that's the way of our culture. I mean, our culture either just ridiculously and crudely talks about it all the time, or is excruciatingly private. But according to the Bible, sex in marriage, it's delightful. It's not something to be embarrassed about. It's to be celebrated. It's to be encouraged. So, to the married amongst us, let me ask you, are you delighting in each other? Are you allowing your spouse to adore you? Are you working at being naked and not ashamed with each other? God delights in it. Maybe we should too. And to all of us, married or unmarried, are we encouraging those who are married to be delighting in each other? Are we praying that they have good sex? When was the last time you prayed that? Are we praying that they would be a gift to each other? And what a gift to be able to celebrate and encourage the sexual love of a married couple. For the older men to encourage the younger men to delight in their wives. For the older women to encourage the younger women to delight in their husbands. The Apostle Paul specifically encourages this in Titus chapter 2. That godly older women urge younger women to love their husbands. Now, of course, loving your husband is more than just sexually, but it's not less than. And the godly older woman are to urge the younger women in this, just as the godly older men are to urge the younger men. And so if you are an older woman or man, godly woman or man, and you don't think you can be encouraging the younger men or women in your church family in anything, let alone to delight in their spouses, well, that's pretty sad. Because you could actually be the greatest encouragement for a married couple. If you thought to pray that they delight in each other sexually, if you thought to catch up with a couple to check in with them and ask how they're delighting in each other. Many years ago, my minister at the church that I was at used to regularly meet with me and ask a series of questions. Questions like this. Firstly, have you been above reproach in your financial dealings this week? Secondly, have you spent time daily reading the Bible and praying? Have you been with a woman who's not your wife in any inappropriate way this week? And then finally he'd follow up with, have you just lied to me? But I wonder if such accountability, the Song of Songs actually might guide us to ask slightly different questions. Questions like, have you delighted in your spouse this week? Have you adored them? Because the first night after the wedding and every sexual encounter afterwards in marriage, that's to be celebrated and to be encouraged because it's delightful. It's delightful. Weddings and wedding nights and sex in marriage, these are delightful because they point to the delight of being adored, the greatest delight, which is the third point. A point that the Song of Songs very, very clearly sings, right? But then again, as we've noted, there's a fairy tale element, right, to this poem. It traffics in a vision worthy of the idea of Solomon, but not so much in the reality of Solomon himself. I mean, let's face it, Solomon was a bit of a bozo. He ends up having hundreds of wives and concubines, and that mainly for political and status reasons, not for love, right? So, not ideal, unlike this poem. The picture of a royal wedding and an exquisite first night sex, this is all ideal and delightful, but in reality, well, it's often underwhelming. I can tell you my wedding night was not bad, but not quite what Song of Songs might have led me to expect. And I realise that for many others, the ideal marriage and intimacy here in the Song of Songs can be uncomfortable, even painful, because maybe you've lost a spouse and your craving for their caresses just goes unmet. Or maybe you've been or you're going through a hard or a broken marriage where the thought of intimacy just turns you off. Or you're just not physically able. Or that right person just seems elusive as ever. Or your sexual desires are broken. And so the delight here in Song of Songs of the wedding and the delight of the wedding night perhaps do nothing for you. Maybe, in fact, they tease you at best and maybe pierce your heart with grief. But it's really important for all of us here, to see that the Song of Songs is precisely what we need to take to heart, what it's saying here. This is what's good for your heart, because what's promised here in the Song of Songs between a man and his wife, that's just a shadow of a greater wedding and a greater consummation that all who trust in Christ get to enjoy, and makes every other wedding and every other wedding night and intimacy in marriage look like a bad cover band. See what the Apostle Paul says in Ephesians 5. No one ever hated their own body, but they feed and care for their body just as Christ does the church, for we're members of his church. And then Paul quotes from Genesis. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. And then note this is a profound mystery, but I'm not talking about the man and his wife. I'm talking about Christ and the church. A man and his wife becoming one flesh in marriage, that is just a shadow of Christ and the church. That's the real marriage, that every other marriage, including the ideal marriage here in Song of Songs, is just a shadow of. The marriage between Christ and his people. All those who trust and rely upon Christ for life eternal with God, in the most profound way, they are married to Christ. He is the groom. We are the bride. We're his bride. And so the picture of the wedding and the consummation here in Song of Songs, this ideal picture even, that itself is just a shadow of what is actually ours in Christ. And so in the light of that, in the light of being Christ's bride, this passage here in Song of Songs, you know what it does? It does something so beautiful. It uniquely shows us the most delightful thing possible. And you know what that is? That we're adored. That when God looks on us in Christ, we're flawless. Just as the shepherd boy looked on his wife from head to almost toe and could see no flaw, so God looks on us from head to toe and back again and sees no flaw. In one of the most stunning parts of the Bible, perhaps my favourite verse, the Apostle Paul says this: God made him who had no sin, that is Jesus, to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. You see, on that cross, when Christ died on that cross, Christ became sin for us. He suffered what we deserved so that his righteousness, his beauty, becomes ours. In God's eyes, we are righteous. In God's eyes, it's as if we've never sinned. In God's eyes, we're flawless. But do we believe this? Do you believe this? Do you believe this? God adores you. See, the reality is, we're already standing naked. Not in a mirror, but before God all the time. And there is nothing he doesn't see about us, our brokenness, our cruelty, our blemishes. But as we trust in Christ, God clothes us in Christ's righteousness, in Christ's beauty. In Christ, we're flawless. God can't but adore us. There's nothing we can do to get out of his love. There's nothing that we need to hide from him and his love. Right? His love is not dutiful. He's not just gritting his teeth and loving us because he said he would, but it's not really that fun. No, this passage here in the Song of Songs pushes us to see that in Christ, God adores us. We've stolen his heart. To him, we're beautiful. There is no flaw in us. We're delightful to him. Now, is this just hyperbole on the lips of God, that he might think of this like that? But in reality, actually, we're not flawless. He's just lovesick. Or is what God says more than just true for him, right? Isn't it true also because he says it so? Who are you trusting, him or you? Isn't he the one who says, "Let there be light," and there it is? And in Christ he says, "There is no flaw in you. I adore you. From head to toe, I adore you." How delightful. It's no mistake that such delight in the Bible comes to us in a song. So let's sing.